My podcast brings all the boys to the yard and they're like, it's better than yours. You're damn right. It's better than yours. I could treat you, but I'd have to charge. Won't be charging for this one. Not for this dribble, everyone. You are locked into the open source. Welcome. Tom and I are joined by guests Neil and Hugh from Manifesto, the digital experience agency. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hello. I don't know how to follow that.
That's it.
That was certainly one of the most unique intros to a podcast I've ever been involved with.
You had fair warning, both of you, because I did tell you before we started recording that they're the most random things you've ever heard. Our topic, by the way, for everyone who's listening and watching at home, is a little bit on climate change, not just climate change globally and, you know, the whole Al Gore thing, but more specifically in the tech industry, and how does the tech industry contribute to things like carbon emissions? What can we do to change? And also, how's the tech industry helping improve those things? So this news article on Sky News, 7 technology solutions that could help solve the crisis, talks about carbon capture. There's also how we can change what cows are fed, believe it or not, to improve carbon emissions. So good to see those kind of technological changes. And in this case, burgers made from insects. So I'm going to turn to our panelists. Anyone eaten a grasshopper burger before?
Once I have, I gather we may all be eating grasshopper burgers in the not too distant future, assuming that you're not already vegan.
Yeah, or burgers grown in labs, right?
Yeah, or that.
Grasshoppers are very high in protein, so I'm told.
I was going to say, have you done the Bush Tucker challenge already, or?
So my stance on it actually. So my partner works for a climate change charity, and she brought with her a much more sustainable approach to eating meat. My perspective is that we should all just be a bit more responsible about, if we are going to eat meat, about the amount of meat that we eat and where it comes from. Neil, you've gone one step further, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fully vegan and I've been for a couple of years or so. And my kids are as well. My wife, who's absolutely the instigator of that. But looking at things like insect burgers and lab grown meat, I think just the amount of press coverage you can see that type of thing getting is, you know, it is encouraging because it shows that people are changing their attitudes.
My daughter really pleasantly surprised me the other day. So you're about to see proud dad face thing, but she was lining up outside school just before Christmas, and she said, "Daddy, I'm going to go and ask the head teacher in a minute because I want to do an assembly on pollution. I don't think people pay enough attention to it."
Wow. I think you've got your next guest sorted for the podcast.
I think so, yeah. But I think the point is as well, seeing the younger generation come through and have that awareness is a great thing. Flipping it around a little bit, what do we think the tech industry is doing about this?
I think there's a definite general lack of understanding of the impact that the tech industry has. So to throw a bit of a stat out there, if you look at the digital industry as a whole, so that's like laptops and phones and the internet in general, and data centers, all those types of things, that the carbon footprint of that is on a par with what the carbon footprint of the aviation industry is, or probably used to be. Pressure that the aviation industry is under to reduce their footprint, and people always point to that as an industry that's always really that is, you know, bad for the environment. There's definitely a movement towards now making websites less emitting, so making them faster and making them less complicated. Getting people off them more quickly is a big thing that I think I'm hoping there's a shift to, rather than the obsession.
Which is counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. Which is
in the world that we work in.
Yeah, completely against the status quo. Changing that status quo is a really interesting thing that we're definitely battling with.
I think I would absolutely love to focus on this topic a little bit longer, and I'm sure James and Tom, you'll basically pull as much information as we can out of Neil's beautiful head. But I to a certain extent feel like I've cheated a little bit. And there's one thing that I wanted to expand a little bit on that data center point. I've been listening to another podcast. I don't know whether we should be plugging other podcasts as well, but this one's brilliant. I don't know if anyone listens to John Richardson and the Future Noughts.
I've seen it, yeah.
they raised an amazing stat that I was so astounded by that it has actually stuck in my head. That is, in 5 years' time, a fifth of our carbon emissions will be attributed to data storage.
Wow.
Which is insane when you think about it. And then John talked about how his emails are clear. And I don't know how many of us on this call could say that we have a zero inbox approach to our work.
No.
Absolutely not.
I don't even know if I could find emails from yesterday because they're that heavily buried. I've got a hell of a lot in there, but how do we stop this whole culture of bombarding people with newsletters? Is there a cultural shift that we need here, or is this more something that we need to start thinking outside the box, different ways of doing these things that we've always done?
So there's a number of our customers that use our CDP product, our customer data platform product. The ultimate goal is you want to provide your customers with a better digital experience. And you want to do that by, with their permission and consent, using all privacy laws and things like that, understand offers that are more contextual to them. Firstly, it helps them spend less time on your website, but still complete a goal, per Neil's comment before. But it also helps reduce the amount of email. So cut out the amount of email you send, and one, you improve their digital experience, but two, you're also helping the planet.
Because I feel like not everybody would know that having a cleaner inbox would effectively be better for the environment. I feel like that's something that's kind of gone over everybody's heads.
I think because we're starting from such a low base of understanding, and absolutely rightly so, the campaign and the facts and the science behind the impact of a petrol or diesel car versus that of an electric car is very well established. But there's not an industry accepted standard for saying this is what is caused by various different things, right? So the SDIA is the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance. You can probably guess what they do. So they've got a roadmap for the sustainability of the internet by 2030. And one of the first things they're doing, like the very first thing in the roadmap, is to say what actually is the impact of the internet. But until we get that number, that sort of crucial number, I don't think we can really start with a campaign that people will accept, if that makes sense. I don't think we can really start shifting the narrative. For me, it's much more about what do companies like Manifesto do, or other digital agencies, or Sainsbury's or Tesco when they're building their website. Like, how do they put the environment as a potential stakeholder of the website, rather than expecting people to use the internet less? How do companies take the lead on it?
You've got all of these figures that are going up, but I think often they can be incredibly difficult for the standard person to interpret and understand. Like, even if I'm being told that this that I'm doing emits this amount of carbon, that doesn't really mean a lot to me because I don't have a reference point. There are some great websites out there who do very well at saying this is exactly what this means. There's an offsetting company called Ecology who we know quite well, that you can basically buy a tree to offset your carbon. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that we should be greenwashing and offsetting, because I think actually there's the balance that we've got to strike here of both offsetting and taking responsibility for our own actions. And I think, Neil, that's an excellent point of, this is all basically down on the big organizations, the big industries, that ourselves to do something about this, and that people can make more responsible decisions for themselves from an informed perspective.
Yeah, measure what can be managed.
It's all about scale as well, right? So as a website owner or product owner or something along those lines, knowing that your website is visited by 1 million people a month, and that equals this amount of, huge amounts of tons of carbon, that's where the real impact is.
Do you think then that there is a cultural element to it? So, for example, if when someone gets a promotion, right, and an email comes through, Tom has had a promotion, and then the people reply all, and you're like, start replying all.
Just aside from saving the inbox for a start, it's like, I've got to go through all of these now because I have to know what's happening. Fear of missing out on everything.
Wouldn't it be great if you could just click a little switch that says, oh yeah, please can I use the sustainable storage option? And then, you're mobilizing the people, and I'm sure then Microsoft and Google could make more money from that too, by the way, but there you go.
I think we should go one step further. That should be the default.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
most customers aren't aware of the impacts of the digital industry. So in all of our kind of pitch documentation now, we talk about it in tangible terms so that people can really understand what that means. And we went one step further and started conceptualizing what that might look like, where we said, okay, well, why don't we design two versions of the homepage? One version that is as low as you can possibly get from a carbon kind of emission perspective, so that when the user hits on that landing page, they have a little toggle on the top. You can either view it in sustainable mode or you can view it in non-sustainable mode. But having something that, I suppose, takes that decision out of the user's hand, and then they can make the decision as to whether they want to view it in bad for the environment mode. And it's a really difficult toss-up, isn't it? Because the client's not going to necessarily want that as the first impression that a user has of their website.
What I like about that option is the option you described it as bad for the environment mode. If that was the actual description, you'd go, I'm not, better not.
But again, storing two versions of a website, again, you end up, regardless of whether it's small or not, the lowest emitting website is the website that isn't built, right? So if you look at something like a dark mode, right, where you have a website in a black background, in the same way that you can switch Twitter to on an app and all that kind of stuff. Powering an LED in our devices, on our screen devices, to white obviously uses more power than if you essentially switch it off and it's black. But again, it's all about scale of impact. If we were giving people an option to switch between white mode and dark mode, that's not going to have as much impact as if we actually build the entire thing if we build it in a static HTML, or we don't use a really heavy CMS, or how can we not use stock imagery? Because you can make the background dark, but if you're loading 15 images on the homepage that don't mean anything to anyone, they just look slightly nice. That's not, that's just wasting emissions. And I think they're essentially like an amalgamation of all best practice from other areas anyway.
Right.
If you're talking about SEO best practice, then having a good SEO is really good for the environment, because you only get people on the site that are really going to do something on there and really want to be on there. From a user experience perspective, well, if you make the site, it's easy to go through the site as quickly as possible. You don't get confused by the UX. You're not clicking on loads of different pages to understand the product offer or whatever. That again is obviously UX best practice, but it's good for the environment. Apologies for World War III going on in the background with my kids. It sounds like there's
good timing for you there.
Yeah,
Neil.
Good fight going on in the background. But that sounds it.
That's all right.
Any idea who's winning?
No. Well, I can guess, but.
I'm still bewildered that this makes a difference, and I understand that there's economies of scale in this, that there has to be a scale nothing to measure and all those sort of things. But are there any companies that are really pioneering this? Because it would almost seem sensible to make it really public that the site is doing that job. To
my knowledge, there's not a sort of client brand, a sort of non-agency brand that is pushing how sustainable their website is. For me, the sort of best known organization to work in this way from an agency perspective is WHOLEGRAIN Digital, and the work that they've done with website carbon.com, which is a way you can just put in a URL and it gives you back. It uses one of those numbers that I talked about earlier to sort of convert the data transfer into kilowatt hours of electricity and then into emissions. And again, that conversion factor is debated, but that's the one they're using, and they've, off the back of that, produced a little badge that you can put on your website. But I can't think of anyone really that there's no big household names that are pushing this for sure. But I think we're on that upward curve, aren't we? On the hype, on the traditional hype curve, as it were. So I'm responsible for new business at Manifesto, and the conversations that I'm having now about the climate and the impacts of digital on the environment are becoming more and more often. Neil's been working on this set of consultancy products that Manifesto, who the hell is that? Manifesto can deliver. And you've done a kind of a fair few of these little consultancy gigs, kind of in almost one-off capacities for the National Trust and various others. And I think what we find is that clients are quite shocked by the outcomes of it.
So as we come towards the close, sometimes every now and then, James and I like to come up with business ideas. And so what I thought would be a lovely way to finish off today is let's come up with business ideas that will have a positive impact on on carbon emissions, preferably technology related, right? I've got one to kick us off with. So I'm going to launch a new video streaming service called 360p, where we encourage people to watch Netflix-like performance, but in really low resolution, because that takes up far less storage, far less bandwidth, and is mobile device friendly anyway. I reckon it's an absolute billion-dollar maker. So who wants to go next?
I've got one pre-canned if you guys want a little bit more time to think.
Go for it.
And you hadn't prepped me on this, Tom. This is actually just something that I thought about after the Future Noughts stat that I mentioned earlier on. Kind of similar to Mission Impossible, this message will self-destruct. Doing something similar with the newsletter, whether that is a newsletter that comes in and it deletes itself so that you don't have an inbox full of old newsletters that you're never going to read again. So there is definitely something in there about that self-destructing or kind of inbox management tool.
Yeah, like that one.
Yeah, I've been going on an unsubscription mission since early in December, and actually, like, as painful as it is in the early days, it's actually it's really easy now, and I hardly get any trash kind of emails, and when they do come in, it's really satisfying to go down and find the unsubscribe and finding out which dubious companies ignore your unsubscription notices is also quite interesting. Sports Direct, one of them. It's not a surprise, is it really? So having gone on about not putting the emphasis on individuals for the last half an hour, maybe the one that I'll do is, and it does already kind of exist, but I think it can be better, much better. But a sort of way of tracking your carbon emissions across both your phone and I think this is what makes it different, your phone and your browser, and you're giving yourself like a carbon budget. Just about raising that awareness. What it means when you are literally just thumbing through stuff and how quickly
doom scrolling, I think it's called. Is that the phrase?
Well, yeah. Well, that's isn't doom scrolling about endlessly just reading bad news from 2020? Oh, well, in 2021.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
But it could be applied to, I think it should be applied to social media in general, because I think the whole thing, it's definitely just doom scrolling.
Well, so maybe we could change the description of doom scrolling in the dictionary, and it now relates to increasing our impending doom by burning more fossil fuels through all of the crap that you're reading.
That's good.
I thought of this idea. I don't know if it's directly correlated to helping the environment or not, but I'll put it out there and see what you think.
I'm worried.
The idea of, I know, I'm scared. You're scared. I had this idea that you have a little groove. When you buy radiators, there's a little groove in the radiator where you can put food to keep your food warm.
Is that hygienic?
It's, when you get takeaway and you're putting the kids to bed and you either have a warming drawer and you have that luxury, or you might put the oven on. I thought, no, save all that. Just pop them in the radiator. Don't shove it in the gaps, but you know what I mean, like a little groove that you have there, and you can just keep... Neil, no.
You can buy cat baskets, can't you? That are attached to radiators, and cats can sit in them. So maybe you could just repurpose that. I like it.
Exactly. I don't know. Is that going to help at all or not?
As long as you're not switching the whole house on just to keep heating the whole house. Just
the pizza's here. Put the heating on. Okay, and on that bombshell, it's time to say goodbye. Thanks so much to Hugh and to Neil for joining us this week. Thanks for playing our stupid business games. Thanks for making us all more aware about the carbon we're all using every day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, everyone.
See you. Thanks,
Bye.
Bye-bye.